The case file came to me as a routine referral, unauthorized invasive procedures performed on living subjects, 43 documented incidents across a single human medical training facility over an 18-month period. The referring clerk had flagged it priority amber, not priority red, because the subjects had survived. All 43 of them. I remember thinking, at least it's tidy. A negligence case with survivors is a 4-session matter. We would review the records, assess the harm threshold, file a remediation order against the facility's licensing body, and move on to the backlog. Peth Roon and Selvar Ash were junior adjudicators on rotation. This was meant to be their training case, a warm introduction to human medical violations before I handed them something serious. I opened the first file at the start of the second hour of session. The subject was a male human, 31 years of age, employed as a freight coordinator. The procedure documented was an exploratory abdominal incision, full open access, not laparoscopic, not emergency, performed under regional anesthetic by a trainee surgeon in her 4th month of clinical placement. Duration, 2 hours and 40 minutes. Documented complications, minor. Recovery, 6 days outpatient. The subject returned to work on the 7th. Pull the consent record, I said. Selvar Ash pulled it. We read it together. The subject had signed the consent form 14 days before the procedure. It was not a waiver extracted under duress. It was not a blanket release buried in an employment contract. It was a detailed witness document in which the subject, freight coordinator, no medical background, no institutional affiliation, had reviewed the trainee surgeon's current skill level, been informed of the risks of a procedure performed by someone still learning, and elected to proceed. Peth Roon said he knew she hadn't done this before. He knew, I said. There's a notation. He asked how many she'd completed. The answer was 4 supervised. Selvar Ash was quiet for a moment, and he still came in. I moved to the next file. The second subject was a female human, 54, retired. The procedure was a thoracic entry chest cavity access for diagnostic purposes, performed by a trainee in his 3rd month. The consent record noted that the subject had previously participated in 2 other training procedures at the same facility. 2 prior occasions. She had come back. I set that file down and looked at my colleagues. We are going to need more time, I said. We spent the next 4 sessions reviewing the full 43 cases. I had Selvar Ash build a cross-reference index by subject demographics, procedure type, trainee experience level, and consent documentation quality. I asked Peth Roon to flag any record where consent appeared pressured, where subjects showed signs of coercion, where financial inducement had been offered above the facility's standard inconvenience reimbursement. She flagged 9 cases for secondary review. We reviewed all 9. In 7 of them, the subjects had declined financial reimbursement entirely. The facility was called the Arnath Institute of Surgical Education. It was not, by human standards, a disreputable place. It held full licensing credentials from 2 regional medical authorities. Its training outcomes, the rate at which its graduates achieved competency certification, were in the top quartile of comparable institutions on its continent. The 43 procedures we were examining were not aberrations in the facility's record. They were the program. Selvar Ash found the program documentation on the 4th day of our review. It was called the Volunteer Clinical Practicum. The institute had been running it for 31 years. Subjects enrolled through a public registry. They were pre-screened for general health and suitability. They attended an information session where the training program was explained in detail, including the experience level of the trainees who would be operating. They were given a reflection period of no less than 7 days before signing consent. Then they came in, and the students practiced on them. I read the program documentation twice. Then I read the Institute's published outcomes data. Then I read a paper the Institute's director had written 11 years earlier, which I will summarize as follows. Experienced surgeons are made, not born. The only way to make them is to cut into living tissue under controlled conditions. And living tissue attached to a willing, informed human being is categorically superior to any simulation currently available because the body responds, bleeds, heals, and surprises you. And those surprises are the education. I sat with that paper for a long time. "Tell me what we're charging them with," I said to Pethroon. She did not answer immediately. She was a capable adjudicator, and I had not hired her for her speed but for her precision. When she spoke, it was carefully. "The procedures caused physical harm," she said. "They caused temporary physical disruption to consenting subjects who understood the risk and accepted it. That is not the same as harm under Article 9. The trainees lacked full competency. The trainees lacked full competency. The subjects were informed of this, and the trainees were supervised by certified surgeons throughout. That is the definition of a supervised training environment under Article 12, Paragraph 4. The subjects were not patients. They had no medical need for the procedures." I looked at her. "Find me the statute that requires medical need for a consenting adult to submit to a procedure they understand and choose." She looked. There was no such statute. We had not written one because we had not imagined needing it. On the 8th day of our review, Selvar Ash brought me a supplemental file that had been included in the original referral packet but not initially flagged. I had assumed it was administrative correspondence. It was not. It was a secondary case. Different facility, different continent. A human surgical trainee, first year, had enrolled in a voluntary surgical exchange program and spent 6 months at a facility that trained in orthopedic procedures. During that 6 months, he had undergone 3 procedures himself, not as a patient, as a volunteer subject, the same as the civilians in the Arnath registry, except that he was a medical professional. He had let other trainees cut into him. While he was learning to cut into others, he had offered himself as the material that someone else learned on. I asked Selvar Ash to pull his certification record. He had passed his competency examinations in the top decile of his cohort. In the notation section of his performance review, his supervising physician had written one line: "He has a quality that is difficult to teach. He understands what he is asking of the patient." Because he has been the patient. I did not share that with Pethroon immediately. I held it for half a day and thought about what it meant. What it meant was that the humans had developed a system. Not an accidental one, not a desperate one. A deliberate, structured, multi-generational system by which they produced surgeons who were technically competent and also possessed of something that their training framework called patient comprehension. They produced it by having people lie down on tables and be cut open by strangers who were still learning. And they had been doing it long enough that the graduates of this system had become the surgeons who now supervised the next generation of trainees, who would in turn produce the next generation of volunteers, who would come in and sign the form and lie down on the table. It had the quality of a cultural institution, a quiet, unglamorous one, the sort of thing no civilization broadcasts about itself because it does not occur to them that it is remarkable. It simply is how you make a surgeon. I asked for an external consultation in the 11th session. I brought in a Vethani simulation medicine specialist named Korvath Pell, who had spent 20 years developing synthetic tissue models for our own surgical training programs. I showed him the Arnath Institute documentation and the outcomes data without context and asked him to evaluate the program's efficacy. He studied it for 3 hours. When he returned, he said, "Where are they getting the tissue models?" "People," I said. He looked at me. "Living people," I said, "voluntary." He looked at the documentation again. He looked at the outcomes data again. He looked at me. "Their surgical competency rates at 18 months post-training are 11% above our simulation cohort benchmarks," he said. "I know. 11% is not a marginal variance. That is a meaningful, reproducible outcome gap." "I know. He was quiet for a moment, and they do this because they believe there is no substitute for living tissue, I said, and because there are humans who agree with them. He left without asking further questions. I filed his consultation notes under the case record. His formal conclusion, submitted in writing the following day, stated that the Arnath Volunteer Clinical Practicum produced measurably superior surgical training outcomes compared to available simulation alternatives, and that he was unable to identify a methodological flaw in the program's design. I filed that too. On the 14th day, I closed the review. We had 43 documented procedures, 43 consenting subjects, 0 cases of coercion, financial exploitation, or informed consent failure, 0 fatalities, 0 permanent injuries above the threshold defined by Article 9, 1 program operating continuously for 31 years with full licensing credentials and published outcomes data available in the public record. There was no charge to file. I dictated the closure notation myself. Peth Roon transcribed it without comment. Selvar Ash organized the case file for archival and then sat for a while at his workstation without doing anything else, which I understood. The notation read, Case 7441 MV, Arnath Institute of Surgical Education. Reviewed, 14 sessions. Finding, no violation of Articles 9, 12, or 18 under the Interspecies Medical Ethics Compact. Procedures performed on consenting adult subjects in a supervised training context with full informed consent and documented institutional oversight. Referral closed. No remediation order issued. I added one line at the end. It was not standard language. I added it because the case file would be archived and read by future adjudicators, and I believed they should know what they were looking at. The line read, for reference, the volunteer clinical practicum has been operating since the facility's founding. The subjects are not vulnerable populations. They are not paid above standard inconvenience rates. They are not coerced. They come back. Several of them have participated more than once. One subject, a retired male human age 67, had participated in 9 separate training procedures over a 12-year period. When contacted as part of our evidentiary review, he confirmed that he intended to continue. He said, and this is in the transcript verbatim, that somebody had to let the young ones learn. I have reviewed medical ethics cases for 41 years. I have seen violations that made experienced adjudicators request reassignment. I have seen negligence so profound it reshaped our licensing frameworks for a generation. I have reviewed cases from 14 species, across 6 treaty jurisdictions, in every category of harm our code defines. I have never closed a file feeling less certain about where the line is. The humans are not cruel. That is the part that stays with me. The volunteers are not desperate or coerced or unaware. They are ordinary people who understand with complete clarity that a student is going to open their body and learn from it. And they decide freely that this is a thing worth doing, that a stranger becoming a surgeon is worth the morning they spend on the table. I don't have a framework for that. 41 years and I don't have a framework for it. I filed the case. I went home. I thought about the retired man, 67 years old, 9 procedures over 12 years, planning to come back for a 10th. Somebody had to let the young ones learn. I keep returning to that sentence. I don't think I'm going to stop.